we kind of have to unpack this slowly. Okay. Now, I understand too that a lot of my viewers, about 40% of my viewers, are from Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox traditions. Okay. And they believe in the canonicity, at least among those denominations that have a notion of canonicity of the Apocrypha. Okay. So I do risk alienating some people with my answer to this question, but I also think it's true that we sort of really understand how the Apocrypha came into certain canons, why that happened, what was the underlying, say, circumstances, and I want to do this respectfully. Okay, I really, really want to do this respectfully. Now, as some of my viewers already know, between my producer and I, we've covered almost the gambit of the whole Christian faith as far as denominations go. You know, we've been, say, in evangelical circles, we've been in Protestant circles, we've been in Catholic circles, we've been in Orthodox circles. We've covered it all. We've covered it all. Okay? And we respect each and every denomination that we have been a part of. We do think that there's good aspects and bad aspects to every faith tradition. Okay? So, when we lay this out, we're not trying to be disrespectful to what anyone holds as scripture. This is my personal opinion, okay? Take it with a proverbial grain of salt. I will justify my opinion. Okay? I will give you evidence for why I believe what I believe. But we're not going to be disrespectful. We're not going to treat this in a cavalier fashion. And I think there's good reasons why I hold the position I do here, even though I do respect the great magisterial traditions. And here I mean both Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, High Anglican, High Lutheran, etc. Okay? So I respect them. I have great deference towards them. But as I said, I think there's an underlying issue here that does need to be discussed and seriously engaged. If we seriously engage this issue, okay, even if we debate this, it's at least then we're engaging it. We're seeing what the challenges are and why certain people might hold to one form of the Hebrew canon versus, say, another form. Okay. Now, let me lay my position right out there. Okay. So I'm not going to hide this. Okay. I accept the Hebrew canon. I accept the Hebrew canon. I do not accept, say, the extended canon of the Old Testament. Okay. And I'm going to, as I say, we're going to unpack this, and I'm going to tell you all my reasons why I hold to the Hebrew canon. Okay. And then we can sort of get into, what we'll do is we will break out, first of all, the early history of the Hebrew canon, and then sort of unpack how it developed in the history of historical theology. Then we'll go to when did it become accepted in the various faiths. And then finally, the theological implications of it. Okay? And we will, again, do this in a respectful, deferential manner. Okay? We don't want anyone to walk away thinking, okay, he just doesn't respect what I believe. And nothing could be further from the truth. I really, really respect that many people hold to the canonicity of the Apocrypha. Totally get that. I just don't. And I never have. And I've always had a difficulty with this because of, say, my approach to the texts. Okay? So, let's get into my reasons. Okay. My first reason is, even though the early church fathers, these are the apostles of the apostles, knew about the canon, knew about the Apocrypha. It was very rarely quoted, and it seems to have been rejected. Okay? Now, let me explain how they used it, because that is the counterpoint. That's the sort of the opposite argument. We do find sparse referencing of the Apocrypha in some of the early church fathers. No question about this. Like, for example, we find Tobit quoted in Polycarp. Susanna, Sirach, and those two are quoted in Ignatius. And First Clement quotes Judith and Wisdom. Okay. And some have tried to make the argument that because these early church fathers quoted these texts, well, these must be canon. That argument doesn't actually follow. And the reason it doesn't follow is because the early church fathers quoted many sources. And some sources they quoted a lot more than the Apocrypha. For example, Plato was incredibly widely quoted, particularly his Republic and the Timaeus. The Timaeus is the other one, Plato's text that's widely quoted across all church fathers. I mean, really, really quoted. And even the Apostle Paul quotes Seneca a couple times, Epimenides, Aratus, and Menander. Okay, these are all Greek philosophers. Nobody would claim that those Greek philosophers are divinely inspired. Nobody would claim this. So you also then cannot make the reverse, the similar claim, the parallel claim that just because the church fathers quoted some of the Apocrypha, those two must also be inspired. Okay? So, Rorik, you all down with adding Plato's Republic to the New Testament? Well, I'm not quite down with that. just saying. Okay. All right. So, now, with that said, there were other early church fathers that were openly against the Apocrypha. Okay? You, of course, had Origen, and, people are, 50% he's a church father, 50% he isn't. Okay, I get that. Origen had some pretty weird ideas sometimes. Okay, so I get that. But you had some more serious church fathers that also were very much against the Apocrypha being included in the canon. Most notably is Athanasius, Cyril of Jerusalem, and Jerome. And this is the Jerome that sort of put together the Latin translation of the Bible for what would become the Roman Catholic Church. So you had quite a few early church fathers that were very, very much against the Apocrypha. So that sort of encapsulates the milieu of the early church tradition with regards to how it accepted the Apocrypha. Okay. Now, later on in church history, there's going to be a sort of a change in, say, the winds. What you had, and a lot of what sort of undergirds this is going to be the Protestant Reformation. Now, in the Protestant Reformation, there was a lot of pushback back to what had been seen as, say, traditional, but teachings that were not congruent with the standard Latin Vulgate. And at that point, you had the Reformation break out, and people going, hey, it's the Bible and nothing else. What you then get, though, is the swing of the pendulum with the Counter-Reformation, particularly the Council of Trent in 1546. And in 1546, the Roman Catholic Church at the Council of Trent basically takes these various apocryphal books and says, now this is now canon to support these extra dogmas that are basically rejected by the Protestants. Okay? So at that point, the Apocrypha becomes part and parcel to Roman Catholic tradition. Now, there had been people reading the Apocrypha since the early Church Fathers. Again, with various degrees of popularity. Like, for example, in the first centuries of the Christian Church, the Apocrypha was not popular. Not by a long shot. The New Testament extra-canonical books were much, much more popular than any of the Old Testament Apocrypha. I mean, by far. Like the Shepherd of Hermas, incredibly more popular book than say any of the Old Testament Apocrypha. Okay? However, with the Council of Trent, it became a standardized part of Roman Catholicism. Now, what was happening in Eastern Orthodox at the time was that it was going under its own pressures and own changes, particularly under, say, Muslim occupation. And they had their own problems. They couldn't form seminaries. They couldn't teach new priests. They had their own difficulties. And during, say, the intermittent wars that were happening in Europe between the Protestants and the Catholics, the Roman Catholic Church did not want to see the spread of Protestantism to Eastern Europe, where there was a huge potential for this, given the fact that Eastern Orthodoxy could not train priests in the same way that the Western Church could. So, in the 17th century, the Vatican reached out to the Patriarchy of Constantinople, and they basically said to the Eastern Orthodox, hey, you know what? You really shouldn't listen to these Protestants, because that sola scriptura rejects all tradition. Well, that was a caricature. It was a caricature of what sola scriptura actually was. But enough people in Constantinople bought it. So in 1672, you had the Eastern Orthodoxy, particularly the Greek branch of Eastern Orthodoxy, adopt a lot of the beliefs of, say, Roman Catholicism, basically for political means, political ends. This is when it's during that Second Council of Jerusalem that the Eastern Orthodox accepts a transubstantiation and a extra canonical books, the Apocrypha, to their canon in an official capacity. Prior to this, Eastern Orthodoxy did not have a firm view of the canon. It also was at that point too, where, how do I say this? Every church has its ups and downs. Ups and downs. Some there are churches that have in their history that they have great councils, and some where they have not so good councils. And in some ways, the Second Council of Jerusalem was kind of the Eastern Orthodox equivalent to the Council of Trent. So I would not call this a high point in either of those sort of traditions' view of bibliology or theology. It was a lot more political than it really should have been. Okay, so that's the historical background. Now, in 1611, with the King James Bible, the original King James Bible is going to translate a lot of that Apocrypha into English. And that's where we find the first translations, major translations of, say, the Apocrypha into English. Okay. Now, that's the history. That's the history. On the other hand,